Alright, hey guys, let's do our notes quick. We got 6 problems to get through. So, yes, they're still adding and subtracting. Guys, up here. So, yes, they're still adding and subtracting problems like we did on Tuesday before we left. We just started our notes. Guys. Alright, we're doing more adding and subtracting today. We did a lot easier problems before we left for break, so these are a little more difficult. I think they're a little more difficult to begin with. Overall, I do not think they're as difficult as the other ones. Alright, so we're still finding common denominators to add and subtract, just they're going to look a little different now. Alright, so our first one here, x over x plus 5 minus 3 over x minus 1. I need to find common denominators. Normally when I did this, I would take, let's say, if I had 3x and 9x squared, right? I'd break them down to 3 times x, 3 times 3 times x, right? I'd circle what I have in common, and I'd multiply that by anything left over. We could do the same thing for problems like this, but you'll notice our only factor for this one is x plus 5. That's a whole term. Remember when we talked about that? X plus 5 is a whole term. X minus 1 is a whole term. It's one factor. So do they share any factors or any terms? No. So to find our least common denominator then, we'd multiply by everything left over, which would be x plus 5, x minus 1. So in this case, because each of these are their own separate term or own separate factor, we're just going to multiply them together to get our least common denominator. Alright? We are not going to FOIL it, however, though. Do not FOIL it. Alright? Because we're going to want to simplify at the end if we can. And if we FOIL it, we'll have to unfactor it again and just make more work. So what we need to do now, because we said that's our least common denominator, is if I look at this first fraction, my denominator is x plus 5. Which piece am I missing up here?
X minus 5.
X minus 1. Right? So I'm going to multiply top and bottom by x minus 1. So I get x times x minus 1 over x plus 5 times x minus 1. Okay? In my second fraction, I have x minus 1 for the denominator. What am I missing from my least common denominator? Look, I have x plus 1. I have that up here. Or x minus 1, excuse me. Which piece am I missing then from my denominator? X plus 5. So I'm going to multiply top and bottom by that to get that least common denominator. So x minus 1, x plus 5. Now we have common denominators, right? Now I can add and subtract, right? Well, do you think I should do something before I add and subtract? Like, look at, do you want to do x times x minus 1 minus 3 times
x minus 1 and x minus 1 cancel.
Simplify.
No, we're not going to simplify. Hey, if we simplify this, guys, just think about it for a second. So don't do what I'm about to do. Don't write this down. Put your pencils down for 2 seconds. If I simplify from this point, and I cancel x minus 1, and I cancel x plus 5, where does that bring me back to?
X plus, the same thing.
Right where we started, right? And we don't want that. So we are not going to simplify yet. We're not going to factor.
Distribute?
Well, let's distribute. Like, look at your numerators. Let's distribute this so when I add and subtract, I have like terms.
X squared minus.
So I get x squared minus x over x plus 5, x minus 1, minus 3 times x is 3x, 3 times 5 is 15, over x plus 5, x minus 1. Now we do our addition and subtraction, because now I have like terms that I can combine either through addition or subtraction. Okay, so x squared minus no like terms, so just x squared. Negative x is the same as negative 1x minus 3x. Negative 4x minus 15. Remember, that subtraction goes to both pieces here. That's one of the top mistakes we see on the assessment. Over x plus 5, x minus 1. Should I just put a box around that, call it a day?
No.
What should I try and do?
The x squared thing, you know what I'm talking about. You know what I'm talking about. The thing that has to equal the thing that multiplies to the other. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about.
Try and factor it.
Words are hard.
Yeah. Words are hard sometimes, I agree. So, does anything multiply to negative 15 and add to negative 4?
Or negative 3, negative 1. Or negative 3 and 1.
Does that multiply to negative 15?
Yeah, no.
No. Right? So, this actually doesn't factor on top. So, am I going to be able to simplify it all?
No.
No. So, you can leave it just like this if you want. Or, you can FOIL out your denominator. Either one's fine. I'm perfectly okay if you leave it unfoiled. And I would suggest you leave it unfoiled, because when you foil, it just gives you another chance to make a mistake, right? We don't need that. Alright. Any questions?
Would I be right if that could have?
If this could factor and you could simplify, this would be incorrect. So you need to simplify as much as possible.
So you do the thing.
You do the thing,
Yeah.
then you factor it.
Yeah.
Alright. Next one. 4x minus 1 is one denominator. 3x minus 2 is another denominator. What do you suppose my least common denominator is going to be in this problem? Do they have any terms that are the same?
No.
No, so I'm just going to multiply the two denominators by each other. 4x minus 1 times 3x minus 2. Right?
I'm so hungry, dude.
I'm gonna shave my mustache too. I'm shaving all day.
I always shave my shit.
Alright, so if I look at my first denominator, guys, I have the 4x minus 1 piece, which means I'm missing what? What am I missing? I have 4x minus 1 out of here. What am I missing?
3x plus.
Shh, I'm asking her. Well, let's look at it. Let's think about it. If I have 4x minus 1, you're not getting off the hook. Out of here, I have two pieces, right? I said I have 4x minus 1 already, so which one am I missing? 3x minus 2, perfect. So I'm going to take and multiply by 3x minus 2 on top and bottom, so my denominator looks like that. So I get 5 times 3x minus 2 over 4x minus 1 times 3x minus 2. Same thing for the second fraction. I see I have 3x minus 2 in my denominator already. Which part am I missing?
4x minus 1.
4x minus 1. So I'm going to multiply top and bottom by 4x minus 1.
So if you know, like, that problem, can you just do it like diagonally instead of like that?
Can you just do it what?
Like, okay, so you see how it's done. Never mind.
Like multiply this and this?
Yeah, can you
It
just set it
won't
up?
always work like that,
Oh, I won't always look like that.
unfortunately. Okay? Alright, so,
Hopefully she got it.
what was my next step over here after I did this?
Distribute.
Distribute, right? Then we can do our subtraction. If I distribute 15x minus 10 over that least common denominator minus 8x squared minus 2x over that least common denominator. Sweet, now that I've distributed and I have common denominators, now I'm going to do the subtraction. Well, in terms of x squared, I have minus 8x squared. in terms of x, 15x minus negative 2x
17.
will give me 17x. Right? Minus a negative turns into positive or plus. And then negative 10 minus, there's nothing with just a whole number, so just negative 10. Over 4x minus 1, 3x minus 2. Can I factor that numerator? No. You cannot factor that numerator, at least not in a way that will help you. So, this is my final answer, unless you also want to FOIL the denominator, which would also be accepted. Right? Remember, we don't want to simplify anything in these steps, then it brings us back to where we began, and we can't add and subtract it. Right? Okay. Any questions so far? I have a question. What time are we out of here? 29. Oh, we got all the time in the world. Alright, we'll probably do, let's say, two and a half problems. 2.5. Alright, our next one. Oh, we didn't need that. 3 over x minus 4 plus 4x plus 2 over x squared plus x minus 20. Okay? Well, first thing we said we need to do is find common denominators, because we don't have them, right?
Papa John. I dare you to say that. Hello, Papa John. How you doing?
This is Mr. Aldridge. Hey. Okay. He stopped by to start. He got a health pass. I haven't seen him since. I think Manisha brought him.
Definitely skip.
I saw him walking down the
Oh god, I saw him in the halls
He
too.
looked hurt. Where you from?
Yeah, no.
Alright, guys, hey, should I just like multiply those two denominators together?
Probably not.
Probably
Maybe.
not.
Probably not.
Probably not. So, let's think about it for a second. What do you think I could do to one of those denominators? What could I do? It starts with an F.
Factor.
Factor. Which one can I factor? The first or the second?
Third, the second one. The second one.
The second one, right? So I'm looking for numbers that multiply to negative 20 and add to 1. What numbers multiply to negative 20?
Negative 5 and 4. Negative 5 and 4.
Everyone's shouting these one at a time.
5 and 4.
Negative 5 and 4, do those add to positive 1?
Oh, 5 and negative 4.
Negative 4 and 5, or 5 and negative 4. Good. So x plus 5, x minus 4. I'm just going to cross that out, because I don't need it anymore. I factored it. I don't need it anymore, right?
Yep.
Okay. So now when I'm finding my least common denominator, I'm looking. Do the two denominators have any terms that are similar?
X minus 4.
X minus 4. So that's what I'm going to start with for my least common denominator. Do they have any other terms that are similar?
Didn't know.
No. So I multiply by anything else that's left over, which in this case would be
X plus 5.
x plus 5. Good. Well, if I look at my first denominator, I have x minus 4. I'm missing what?
X
Plus 5.
X plus 5. So I'm multiplying top by x plus 5 and bottom by x plus 5. Plus, I look here, I have both x plus 5 and x minus 4 already in this denominator. So what should I multiply by?
1. The same thing.
I mean, we could multiply by 1, but do we need to change this at all?
No.
No, so I need to multiply by anything? No, so I just leave this one the same. Just leave it as 4x plus 2 over the common denominator. If you want to think of it, like you're multiplying by 1, it's perfectly okay, because if you multiply by 1, nothing's going to change anyway. So if you want to think of it like that, go ahead and do that. Alright, so same thing, distribute first. 3x plus 15 over the common denominator.
My stomach hurts.
Plus 4x plus 2 over the common denominator. You guys, after I distribute, what do I normally do? Look at the problems we just did. After we distributed, we technically simplify, right? We add or we subtract. Add your like terms, subtract your like terms. 3x plus 4x gives me 7x. 15 plus 2 gives me 17. Over that common denominator, which, can I factor that numerator at all?
No.
No, so am I going to be able to simplify?
No.
No, so this is my final answer, unless you also want to FOIL your denominator, which you do not have to. Alright,
We done?
what was this? We are going to skip that one. We are going to set up E. We're just going to find the least common denominator for E. That's all I want to do. And then we are going to do F. And we done. Deal?
Okay.
Is that okay with everybody? Or do you want to do them all?
Wait, what are we doing?
No? Okay.
Just to F?
So we're going to do E.
Oh,
We're going to set up the least common denominator, and that's it. And then we'll go to F, because I want F is like a special case. Okay? So E. I look at my denominators. What should I do to them? Yeah, with the parentheses, right? What's that called?
Factor.
Factor. Good. We're going to factor them both. Good. Okay? The first one. What does that factor to? Multiplies to -7 and adds to -6. -7 and 1. Good. X minus 7, x plus 1. Hey, is it okay if I just write it like this instead of rewriting the whole thing?
Yes.
Okay. The second one multiplies to -3, adds to -2.
-3 and 1.
-3 and 1. So x minus 3,
Almost.
x plus 1. Okay. So I'm looking for my least common denominator here.
X plus
Is there a term, Bailey, that both of my denominators share? That you see in both denominators?
What?
Just one?
Whoa.
X plus 1. Good. No, you're good. X plus 1. I think we all knew what you meant. These guys are just being mean. Weird. Right? So they share X plus 1. Is there anything else that they share? No. So I'm just going to multiply by everything else that's left, which would be X minus 7 and X minus 3. So you have 3 sets of parentheses in your answer, or in your least common denominator. That's perfectly okay. Right? If I look at the first denominator, I have the X minus 7 piece and the X plus 1 piece. Which piece am I missing?
X plus 1? Wait,
Out of the 3 in my least common denominator.
X minus 3.
Oh yeah, X.
Which one am I missing here?
X minus 3.
Guys, hey,
They're
deep
all-
breath.
they're
Let's
all
think about
three,
this.
all of them 3, right?
When I'm looking at this denominator right here, don't even look at this part. Right? Don't even look at this part. If I'm looking at X minus 7 and X plus 1,
Yeah.
and I'm looking at my least common denominator,
I said X.
I know, but I want everyone.
Oh, my bad.
What am I missing from my least common denominator in this
Oh,
denominator?
now X minus 3.
The X minus 3. So if I were to go do this problem, I would multiply top and bottom by X minus 3.
I thought you were talking about both.
If I was looking at this denominator, I have X minus 3 and X plus 1. Which piece am I missing?
7.
X minus 7. So I'd multiply top and bottom by X minus 7. Now I am not going to go through and do that right now, because I want to do F before the bell rings, because it's kind of a special case. So if I look at it, 5 minus t over t minus 4, minus 3t minus 2 over 4 minus t. Do I have common denominators?
No.
I do not. I'm really close though. Right? If I rewrite the second one, I get negative t plus 4. That is really close to my other one. Except, what do you notice about it? It's adding instead of subtracting. They're just the opposites, right? They have the opposite signs. If you come across this, where your denominators are just the opposite signs of each other, all you need to do is multiply one of your fractions by negative 1. That's all you have to do. Because then, look what happens. If I multiply this second fraction, this whole thing, by negative 1, so remember what I do to the bottom, I have to do to the top. My first one stays the same. Minus negative 1 times 3t is negative 3t. -1 times -2 is +2.
So you just changing each sign.
-1 times -t is +t. -1 times 4 is -4. Look at, when I multiply by -1, I get common denominators. Then just go ahead and do the problem. I can just subtract. Alright? It doesn't matter. Does not matter which one you multiply by -1. Now, I always like to do it so I have positive variables, but you do not have to do that. Okay? So in this problem, I would just go 5 minus 2 is 3. -t, which is -1t, minus -3t, or
2t.
plus 3t would be 2t, over t minus 4. And I cannot simplify that at all. It's a plus
Nope.
sign. It's ugly, but it's a plus sign. Okay? Can't simplify it, so that's my answer. Alright, guys, is there any questions on that?
No, sir.
Okay, here's our plan for the rest of the week. Today we had our last day of new learning. Tomorrow, I think we have a review. I think we have some sort of activity for the review. Thursday will be another review where you get like a review packet. You get to work on it all hour. Friday is our test. Please make sure you're prepared. Stop into Math Resource. Stop in by me. Ask questions. Make sure you are prepared.